Hey everybody, Professor Lewis here from Lone Star College and HCC and a few other places over the years. This is for Economics 2301, Principles of Macroeconomics. So if you're in the micro class, this is not a video that's for you. If you want to watch it, go ahead, but it's not going to be something I'm going to test y'all on. Macro students, y'all will be tested on this. There are different kinds of economic systems that exist in the world today. We've got some general concepts. We've got some particular details here. Your textbooks typically talk about a traditional economy, a market economy, a command economy, a mixed economy, and some of those forms are a little bit, let's say, rough. So what I want to do is deal with three different pure forms, and I'm going to talk about how the different systems operate. Who owns the economic resources? Remember, we learned about that in the first video: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. How are economic decisions made? We're going to talk about some unique attributes of each system. We're going to give a name of an economist, a very important scientist who came up with this kind of a system, an example of a nation that most closely fits the description of that system. There are no truly pure form capitalist or command economies, but there are nations that are clearly favoring capitalism way more than command or mixed, favoring command way more than mixed or capitalism, and of course favoring mixed. These are not going to move in lockstep with the textbook, because many textbooks try to waffle and say, well, all economies are technically mixed. Yeah, but some economies are clearly way more capitalist oriented and others are way more command oriented. So no, I don't accept that cop-out. What I'm teaching you here is what you will be tested on the first unit test, so you definitely want to get this down. I emailed everybody a Word document, and the Word document, among other things, has a table that you can print out if you have access to a printer, and you can fill in by hand. If you want to go ahead and type everything in now, I guess that's okay. What I'm going to advise you all to do is please print out the blank table and then fill it in by hand and just turn it in for problem 2 on your Unit 1 homework, because that's a handwritten assignment. Nothing typed, please. Handwritten only. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start sharing my screen, and there's going to be a tunnel effect for a second, but I'm going to pull that document up. So hold on one second here. Alrighty, share the screen. Now let's go to Word before we all get dizzy. And so what I'm doing is I'm opening this document that's called Economic Systems Blank Table. Now everybody should see this blank table here, and I want you to notice we've got a nice table. If you want to draw this by hand with a ruler, knock yourself out. The first column is your descriptor columns. It's got the proper name. One thing about proper names, students, you can't drop a single word from there. Pure capitalism, command economy, mixed system, or you can call it mixed economy. Don't drop a single word, okay? Capitalism isn't the same as pure capitalism, because you could argue that pure is laissez-faire, whereas market economy is more of an impure capitalist type system. So let's please use the correct names here. Similarly, communism is one kind of command economy, but there's also communalism and fascism, and so no, you can't call it communism. Socialism is one example of a mixed system, but you know what? So is wartime capitalism, like what the U.S. did during World War II. Please don't change the names. These are the correct names. Please use them. Now, for each economy, we're going to talk about who owns the resources, how is the economic activity directed. We're going to talk about 2 attributes that are unique to that type of economy, but not the others. And I've got this row highlighted because this one is mondo important. Who is the economist, the scientist in the economics field who conceived of this system? These are the people that I would say they're like the Jonas Salk, the Albert Einstein, the George Washingtons, etc. of economics as a science here. So you need to know those names. First and last name, and spelling counts, of course. And then last but not least, please notice the phrase is most closely fit. It doesn't say perfect fit or matches exactly, because even the most laissez-faire capitalist type nations out there, like Hong Kong and also like New Zealand, still have more government intervention than a true pure capitalist economy would have. The point is they favor this system more than the other 2. So just keep that in mind. And there's going to be multiple examples. So we're going to start by talking about pure capitalism. Pure capitalism, first of all, economic resources are privately owned. That's the first thing that you should know about economic resources. They are privately owned. What this means is private citizens and private businesses, they own the natural resources that we call land. All those mineral deposits, all the water rights and everything, owned by private citizens and businesses. Similarly, labor resources are the property of the people who possess those skills. My professorial skills are my property, for example. If you're a barista, your coffee making skills are your property. Capital resources, remember the manufactured resources used to produce and sell goods and services, they're owned by private businesses and the entrepreneurs who own them. And entrepreneurial resources are owned by people and the corporations that organize them. How is economic activity directed? We say we have market-directed economic activity. That's part of the reason why capitalism is often called the market system. Markets, we've already talked about in the first lecture, are institutions that bring together buyers and sellers, whether it's a supermarket, a flea market, a commodities market, want ads for labor. Markets determine what's produced, how much, what price is charged, where is it produced, where is it sold, who's going to be able to buy it. All those things are settled by the interaction of supply and demand in markets. We'll learn about supply and demand in a couple of more lectures. Now, let's talk unique attributes. The first unique attribute for capitalism that everybody needs to know is a special right called the right to bequeath. It basically means that people who own things of value, the term asset means something that holds value. People who own assets, whether it be financial assets like money or physical assets like real estate or businesses, are able to determine before they die who inherits these assets. And on top of that, even if they don't decide, in a capitalist economy, the government is able to decide and make sure it passes to the proper person and the government doesn't take possession of it. This is necessary to ensure that all private property remains private property. You don't want to have a generation of people die off and then there's no more private property. Okay, our next unique attribute is called the limited role of the government in the market. Now, sometimes I hear political pundits on the news think that the government is supposed to have no role in the market, and that is patently false. Limited role is not the same as no role. No role of the government means anarchy. No, the notion of limited role is that the government has a very narrowly defined role of protecting private property rights, but the government doesn't do things like regulate prices or regulate the way people do business. However, in order for markets to function effectively, the government has to be able to make sure that people don't do things like steal and vandalize and destroy the property of others and businesses. They don't violate people's persons and this and that and the other. Private property rights are important because without private property rights, people probably wouldn't want to trade. People would probably want to hole up in a bunker and arm themselves, and that's not very conducive to economic development. So whatever activities the government engages in, police, national defense, fire protection, infrastructures, they are there specifically to facilitate trade and let markets work efficiently. But what the government doesn't do is it doesn't seize businesses and take control of them and tell them what they can and can't produce or how much they have to pay or how little they have to pay workers. The government does not step into those areas. Now, obviously, the U.S. government is a little more invasive than protecting private property rights, but compared to many other nations out there, the U.S. government is a lot less invasive. Now, let's go ahead and talk about this next part here. And folks, I'm highlighting this because I want this thing to be seen here. And let's see, let's make this a little bit bigger here. Class, Adam Smith, he is the Adam, he is the Moses, he is the Jesus, he is the Muhammad, he is the George Washington, he is the founding father of economics as a social scientist, and Adam Smith is the man who came up with the term capitalist and came up with the models for supply and demand for markets. Adam Smith wrote a book called The Wealth of Nations, and in it he chronicled the things of value that were possessed by nations. And at the time he wrote this, which was the middle 1700s, everybody thought that wealth was gold, or wealth was religion, or wealth was military power or regalism. No, Adam Smith showed people through a very passive-aggressive technique that wealth was those things that we actually spent the money on, that we pursued after, the natural resources, the material resources, the skills, the concepts, these things that actually produce the things that we used and that let us not only survive, but live and enjoy life. Adam Smith was a revolutionary philosopher and thinker, and we are very grateful that he came up with these concepts here. Now, I'm giving you a list of several nations that best fit the description. No nation is truly purely capitalist. However, these nations, the United States, Canada, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Mexico, and Dubai, the United Arab Emirates, lean capitalistic. These nations here are going to be much more market oriented, and the government is less invasive. I'm not saying they're non-invasive. Our government is a little bit more invasive than some people would care for. But if you took a look at these nations and compared them to, say, some nations in Central Europe or, say, North Korea, our government is nowhere near as invasive as that. And so they lean capitalistic, and that's why they fit the description the best. Now, command economy is very much the antithesis of capitalism. One of the first things I want everybody to notice here is that in a command economy, economic resources are publicly owned. That means they're owned by society in common, not individually. It also means that the government owns them. And so the thing is, private property is maybe the clothes on your back, and that's about it. Okay, if you are an employee with any labor skills, you're employed by the government and our government property. If you are a business operator, like a manager, you work for a government-owned business. And so the government basically is the economy, the government is the market. Now, economic activity in this type of system is not directed by markets. Markets don't exist per se. And even if there's a building and calls itself a supermarket, it's actually directed by a central authority of the government. The government decides what product is produced. The government decides how they are produced and where they are produced. The government decides which resources are used to make the products. They decide who gets to buy them, and they decide how much they'll be sold for. Everything that's decided by supply and demand and the interaction of markets with private citizens and businesses is decided by a central authority, and this leads to frequent problems, shortages especially. If any of you are fans of the videos called In Soviet Russia, they kind of give you some inkling to the way a strong command economy operated and also its fallacies as well, its flaws. North Korea is a command economy, and Kim Jong-un and his cronies are the central authority that directs everything in that country. All right. Now, the first unique attribute is something called the synergism principle. If you've ever had a coach or a manager that said there is no I in team, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, they are leading towards what we call the synergism principle, which is the idea of collective work and effort being more important, and individual desires or individual roles are minimized or considered unimportant. And in fact, this leads to a much more strong statement that is actually quoted in a book called The Communist Manifesto in various ways, and was quoted by Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, Joseph Stalin, and Trotsky, and all of them. The needs of society are more important than the desires of the individual. Or as Karl Marx, one of the principal authors of the Communist Manifesto, said, by each according to his ability, to each according to his need. People are expected to work and use all their skills and abilities to the point of exhaustion for the greater good of society. In exchange for this, you get a house, you get clothes, you get food, you get an education. Now, a lot of people say that sounds like a good deal, but my response is not so fast. What kind of food? What kind of house? What kind of clothes? It matters a ton what kind it is, and there's not a lot of choice there. Now, the main economist, I've already named him, but I need to also mention his cohort or co-conspirator here. Karl Marx, along with Friedrich Engels, were the two primary authors of a book called The Communist Manifesto, though Karl Marx originally wrote a book by himself called Das Kapital. Karl Marx was an Austrian. He was kind of a bad case of self-hatred. If Karl Marx were alive today, he'd be running a political channel on YouTube called Capitalism is Evil. And he'd be on there yelling and screaming at the camera about how evil capitalism is and what needs to be done to capitalists. And gee, that sounds like some of the people that are out there protesting these days about nonsense. Now, you have to understand, Marx lived in an era where you had factories exploiting workers. If you've ever had to read Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, for example, that illustrates some of the conditions in the United States that Karl Marx saw in Western Europe. And Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels had this whole series of debates in beer halls and in coffee houses all over Vienna about what needed to be done in order to be able to reform capitalism. They concluded it wasn't going to be reformable, so as Nickelback says, "Burn it to the ground," was their attitude. The Communist Manifesto detailed ways to destabilize and ruin capitalism. What I find very interesting, though, was that Russia tried to adopt communism, and his booklets were very popular. Lenin and Stalin and Trotsky read them, and they tried to find ways to implement them. But Karl Marx himself basically felt that, you know something, communism doesn't really work in a large nation, like a big landmass like Russia or a big diverse population like the United States. He said it wouldn't be maintainable, that it worked best in a small country that was self-contained and had a lot of control over its own land resources. If you take take a look at communism today, it's mostly a lot of small nations that operate with them and that sometimes rely on help from neighbors, it seems. Now, I'm going to say a couple of things here. Okay, fascism is also a command economy, and in many cases, fascism is a dictator-operated free market society that's not really free. Cuba and North Korea are examples of communist dictatorships there, and Yemen and Venezuela claim to be socialist, but let's be quite frank. There's a couple of warlords that run Yemen. It's an oligarchy that's led by 5 dictators, and Venezuela has been through one dictator after another for the last 10 years. If you don't believe me, probably some of your classmates are from Venezuela, and they can elaborate on that way better than I can. One student very intelligently surmised, so any small country with a dictator is basically a command economy, and I say, you're mighty right. Now, mixed systems here. Socialism is an example of a mixed system, and so is wartime capitalism. The thing about a mixed system or a mixed economy is that it has strong elements of capitalism and command, but it doesn't really favor either one of them. In fact, many mixed systems have very strong markets, but the government is a lot more pervasive and invasive, and in some cases either dominates an oligopoly, a market with a few big sellers, and they're the biggest player in the market, or it has a government monopoly, but it's only certain industries that are considered key that they do this here. And so let's talk about the mixed economy here. There's a lot more to write over here, and this is being a lot more stubborn here, so bear with me. First thing I'm going to mention here about the mixed system is that most resources and enterprises are privately owned, but the government owns and operates the key resources and industries. Those that are considered most important or necessary to survival or critical security, the government owns or dominates, but the other enterprises are privately owned, private enterprise operated. Now, another thing to mention here is we have free markets operating, alongside some centralized planning. Folks, if you were to visit France, the United Kingdom, or Germany, there's plenty of free market capitalism going around. However, if you were to visit a hospital or a medical clinic or a pharmacy in Germany, England, or France, you would find that they were government owned and operated. You would find most people in England pay what's called a health payer tax, and they have government run health insurance, whereas in the United States, you have private insurance and private clinics that operate instead. British Petroleum is a government owned corporation in England. In the United States, our oil companies are privatized. And so those are some things you'll notice are a little bit different. So centralized planning is operating alongside some free markets. Now, the key industries that the government owns or dominates are energy. Think about like gasoline or petrol, as they call it in England, electricity, things of that nature. Healthcare, like it's a health insurance, pharmacies, medical clinics, and hospitals and all like. Telecommunications, TV broadcast networks, telephone, both wireless and land-based, internet, etc. Fun fact about the United Kingdom, the British Broadcasting Company has most of the TV channels you can pick up over the airwaves. There is only one private network for over the airwaves TV called ITV. Second fun fact, all citizens of the United Kingdom are required to pay a £150 or $300 license every year to be able to watch TV over the airwaves. And the BBC has a law enforcement wing that goes to people's houses to see if they're watching TV without having paid the license, and you can be arrested for that. Folks, here in the United States, you buy the TV, whatever's broadcast over the airwaves, you can watch for free, okay? And I'm using free in air quotes here. You want cable, that's where you pay for it. But in England, no, you pay for it even over the airwaves. Transportation, this includes people and freight, British Rail, Euro Rail, okay? British Airways, government-owned corporation, okay? All of these types of transportation infrastructures and companies are operated by the government or they're government majority-owned corporations. Very different from the United States. Very different command, and the fact in the command, it's everything, not just these four. So consider these four as a litmus test. If it's exactly these four, you're in that mixed system sweet spot. If it's more than these four, you're heading towards command. If it's fewer, you're heading towards capitalism. Now, a couple of things to mention here. The government provides more of what we call public goods and services than we see in capitalism. Public goods would be things like parks, paved streets, bus services and the like. Public services would be things like the public school system, okay, for education. But the thing is, citizens are going to pay higher taxes for these public goods and services, and the government controls access to them. One of the reasons why people are very resistant to going to national health care policy in the United States is because people pay higher taxes in those countries where they have a national health care tax. Folks, the average tax rate for most citizens of the U.S. is about 27%. In Canada, it's about 36%. And Canada's capitalist leading, but they have national health care required in every province except for Alberta. The way they pay for it is they have a national sales tax. So whenever you buy something, you're going to be paying anywhere from 16 to 24% in sales tax. And what it is typically like the first 8% is provincial, but the rest is government sales tax. And that's how they pay for healthcare. So you pay for healthcare, yours and everybody else's, every time you buy something else. In England, it's an extra tax that's taken out of your paycheck on top of that. People in the United Kingdom pay about 45% of their income in taxes compared to 27% of the United States. Also, but keep in mind, in the US, if you need to schedule a surgery, even with private health insurance and copays, you can typically schedule it very quickly as long as there's not a disaster preventing it. But in the United Kingdom, some government bureaucrat will say, well, your condition isn't that severe. Your tumor is less than 1 centimeter, so you can wait. Somebody with a 3-centimeter tumor is ahead of you in line, and they need to have it removed first. The problem is your tumor could metastasize, and you could die of cancer while waiting in line. Here in the U.S., the doctor will say, get that tumor out, but you're going to have to pay $20,000 on a copay. There is no perfect system. No perfect system. Now, the economists we largely credit with the creation of the English socialist system was actually an avowed capitalist named John Stuart Mill, a Scotsman like Adam Smith, but he owned textile factories. But Mr. Mill was a very stringent Christian who believed that if he treated his workers badly, God was going to punish him. And so as a result, he made his factories have safety equipment and had everybody have safety training, even though it wasn't required by law. He also tried to pay a wage that a working man could support his wife and children on, as opposed to paying the lowest he could. On top of that, he refused to employ child labor in his factories, and he even provided some form of subsidies to housing. A lot of people wanted to work for Mr. Mill's factories, but if you got fired for them, good luck getting hired again. And he basically had the best pick of workers as a result. The thing is, Mr. Mill had a strong conscience. He also took a look at Karl Marx's writing and said, no, we shouldn't burn capitalism to the ground. What we need to do is find a way to redeem it. If the human soul can be redeemed, so can capitalism. And so one man with a belief is stronger than a million with only passing interest. That's a quote from Mr. Mill. He actually began to push for reforms in the United Kingdom, and he got the ear of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, and they began to pressure the cabinet over there and pressured Parliament, and they began a gradual transition towards a socialist system as a result. He wrote a series of essays on socialism where he described how to redeem capitalism. Now, if we take a look at a lot of our economies today, a lot of the mixed economies were once capitalist, but they transitioned towards the mixed economy, or they were once command and transitioned towards a mixed economy. The United Kingdom, France, Sweden, and Germany were once capitalist economies, but they transitioned and became mixed economies, whereas China and Russia are once command economies, and they have transitioned and become mixed economies as well. So I'm kind of arranging them in a way so that the former capitalist, now mixed economies are on top, and the former command, now mixed economies are on the bottom. And so here we have a nicely organized table. Sometimes when you have lots of descriptors, this is a good way to do this here. If you want to change these into a group of 3 paragraphs, just understand that this first column has got verbiage you need. Same if you want to convert it to lists, but this here kind of covers everything. So what now? Okay, what now is the big question. Well, I hope that maybe you would understand that you could recognize more than a few nations in our world, and at the same time, it kind of gets you to thinking about different kinds of economic systems. Take some time to work on this problem if you're able to do so. This video will be retained here at YouTube. I thank you very much. I wish you all health and safety and success, and I look forward to seeing you after Labor Day.